Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Healing American Narratives podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. Good to be with you here on another Wednesday morning. Good to be inhaling and exhaling at the same time you are.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, with that being said, what's your spiritual energy number?
I'm showing up out of 10. Didn't have to choose that this morning. Just have a lot of enthusiasm for the day. And I'm good to go for a lot of reasons.
I join you as a 10. I've got a chance to get out and get my walk in this morning and go through my gratitude state, which I explain. I guess I'll go right into that. I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for that 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. I'm grateful for my problems and challenges because I see those as opportunities to grow. I'm grateful for being surrounded by people who uplift me. And I'm also grateful for the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide. So with that being said, what's your gratitude moment this morning?
Yeah, so I echo much of what you said, but I'll start with my favorite material things: indoor plumbing, electricity that allows me to have a refrigerator with fresh food in it, and the opportunity and the availability of getting more fresh food whenever I really want to. And I recognize that puts me ahead of, maybe 90-something% of people on the planet. It's easy to forget that living in a post-industrial society. I'm relatively healthy physically and, as far as I can tell, mentally, and I get to do work that I care about. So I'm grateful for all of that. I have friends and family that love me and whom I love. And so all of that is just wonderful. And I'm consciously grateful of all of it.
Excellent, excellent. So with that being said, why don't you walk us into our topic for today's discussion?
Yeah, so today we're going to, with your blessing, to talk about an upcoming course that is an evolved version, or I should say an evolving version of what we began talking about 3 years ago. We began talking about my book, Healing America's Narratives. And the content of that book has continued to evolve since it was published in 2022 in two ways. One is, there's one way it's not evolving because the historical part remains relevant. So when I spoke about the initial subjugations in the country, the subjugations of women, Africans, and then African Americans, subjugations of indigenous peoples, that history remains intact and relevant. But what continues to shift are current events, obviously. And so the course, which begins on May 31st and goes for 10 sessions through August 9th, is entitled For Our Grandchildren and Theirs. And it's subtitled Navigating Shadow, Us versus Them, and Other Threats to Democracy. So we're going to kind of unpack that today. I don't want to say too much more at this moment. Just wanted to put that out there, and then hear your take on it and see what direction we might go in terms of unpacking the individual sessions, the dates, times, all of that type of stuff. So I'll be quiet for a moment here.
Well, yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. Looking forward to it. So my initial question would be this.
Yeah.
Two questions. One, why do you feel the time is now to create the course now? That's one thing. And the second thing is, who do you see as the target market that you would like to be attendees of this class?
Yeah, great. Both questions are really important. So the answer to the first one is there's a concept, which is actually a true thing, but it's hard for us to recognize because we have clocks on the wall and clocks on our computers and our phones and everything else, is it's not so much that it's relevant now, it's that we're in an eternal now. And the course is actually the current iteration of the book. So what I'll be teaching beginning on May 31st is the 5th iteration of this course. So I began teaching this material immediately after the book came out, but I've been teaching it more specifically at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Connecticut since spring 2024 semester. So all that to say, this material has remained relevant. The time has been right for it since before the book even came out because of what's going on in the country. So that's the first piece. I'll just pause there. Is that a satisfactory answer? So it's not that suddenly right now it's relevant. This is just the latest iteration of what I've been doing as a teacher for the last 2.5 or 3 years, and what I was doing as a writer pretty much from 2016 forward because of what was being done in the country and to the country.
And you spoke of 5 iterations since you initially started. So I'm curious to what drives the iteration for you to say, okay, I need to do another iteration of this training or to build upon it.
Yeah. So when the book was published, the most current information in the book was they were about 2 or 3 months into the January 6th Select Committee hearings. And anybody remembers what that was about. And then the book went to print. So that's the most up-to-date thing in the book. Again, the book came out in September of 2022. Since then, a lot has happened. So COVID was winding down when the book came out, but there were still problems with COVID. The ongoing investigation into January 6, 2021 was ongoing. But since all of that, we had 4 years of a Joe Biden presidency. We had another election. We had the re-election of Donald Trump. We had the implementation of Project 2025. We currently have a war in Iran. We've been killing people in the Caribbean and Pacific. We've dismantled, USAID, the Department of Education. Elon Musk had a strong influence and impact on the United States federal government. He spent $250 million to help elect a president. So a lot of that just keeps happening. And so when I teach, the historical piece stays solid. The psychological piece on shadow and developmental psychology stays solid. But there's a piece of the course that deals with what's happening now. And that's what the current iteration is. So I'm going to teach the 9th session of this 10-session course at University of Connecticut this Friday. It's different than the 9th session was last semester. And when I teach this beginning in May, the 9th session will be sometime first week in August, I think. I'm not sure about that. It'll be different than what I'm going to do this Friday because there will be some things that need to be updated. Now, I'll say one more thing about that. The course isn't a current events course where people come in and just talk about what's happening and complain if they don't like it or clap if they do like it. It's a course that's grounded in the integration of various disciplines. It's multidisciplinary, and I've mentioned them already. Developmental psychology, Jungian shadow, the history of the United States, and then it deals with current things that are happening. Part of which is part of a global movement toward oligarchy and autocracy that the United States is part of now. So all those things keep moving and need to be updated if the course is going to be up to date. So I hope I answered your question there.
You did. And now the second part of my question, going back to the type of audience, and let me explain a little bit more of what I mean by that. I mean, from the context of, you said you've been teaching it for 9 sessions at the University of Connecticut. Was that?
Well, this semester I'm into the 9th week at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Connecticut. Yeah, but this is
Okay.
the 4th time I'm teaching it.
And so now my question now is, do you have a preferred, in the marketing world, we use the term avatar now of your perfect student, or do you care, age wise, what's the demographic of attendees, men, women, education level, job, that type of, or is it just open to anybody who just has the interest and want to just unpack what's going on? So I'm just curious to see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so I mean, I would welcome younger people, because at UConn, the audience is mostly older adults. I mean, in their 50s and older. But basically, it is open to anybody who is. In fact, I have a whole page on this in the marketing material. But anybody who's concerned with truth and truthfulness and committed to differentiating fact and opinion, anybody who has intermittent bouts of fear, doubt, rage, hopelessness, hope because of of things that keep happening. Anybody who is open to an interdisciplinary look at the state of the nation. What I mean by that is most of what we get, even in the news that I think does a good job, the journalists that I listen to, they talk about politics, they might talk about history, they talk about what happened, the who, what, where, when, and maybe if they have a sense of it, the why of what happened, which is important. We need good journalists to do that. Then there are historians who know a lot about the history of the country, the history of autocracy around the world. There are psychologists who talk about what they think might be the psychological state of certain people in politics. I haven't heard anybody speaking about all of those together. And I believe, and I'd make a pretty good argument for, if you really want to understand what's happening today, you need all of those. You need good journalists, you need historians and history, you need an understanding of adult developmental psychology, you need to know what the shadow is and how it manifests. And that's the people that I'm looking for. Not that they know everything I just said. I mean, that's why the course is important, because they can. It's education, it's learning. But people who want to understand what's happening, to get the best information that they can, so they can be better informed, they can make better decisions. And when they're in conversations, as many of us are, some people don't anymore, but when they're in a conversation with somebody, with whom they agree or disagree, they can be better informed and have a more historical, psychological, spiritual grounding in what they have to say. So if the person happens to be a freshman in college or a recently retired medical doctor, that's fine with me. I'm not trying to keep anybody out. And I'd like as many people who are concerned about the state of the nation and the world to attend. Now, I know from a marketing perspective, the idea that, well, this is for everybody, that's really not a good marketing approach. I mean, I've done enough other things in my past. In terms of when I was doing coaching, well, who's my best coaching client? But this is open to people who are concerned about the state of the nation, don't understand everything that's going on, might have a deep understanding of one thing and a superficial understanding of another. And my work, as I see it, is to integrate as much as I can and present it and connect all the dots.
Now, for folks who are new to the show, and definitely for folks who may be new to you, what gives you the qualifications and for them to say, okay, I'm going to not only invest my money, but the time to take your course? What qualifies you for that?
Yeah, so a bunch of things. I'll start with, I've been an educator for 50 years, beginning on a high school level. So that's just the professional preparation. I've been an educator for 50 years. I know I look like I'm only 50 years old, but that's true. I have a sense of humor, but more to the point, since the mid to late 1990s, I've committed myself to working with studying and learning integral theory and practice, which is an attempt to understand our existence through an integration of lenses or disciplines. So I've been doing that since the late 1990s. I've done the better part of 10 years of research now. There were about 6 years of reading and writing that went into the book, Healing America's Narratives. I've been writing on Substack on this for the past almost 3 years now. My coaching business was grounded in my ability to understand adult development. I mean, other things grounded it as well, but I coached people who wanted to grow. It didn't matter what they did for a living. So I wasn't a mentor saying, I'll help you be a better CEO, because I've never been a CEO. And I wasn't a consultant saying, I'll help you work in the pharmaceutical industry, because I've never worked in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm just using examples when I say pharmaceutical. I could have said fossil fuel industry or gun industry. But the people I worked with as a coach were people who were interested in growing as human beings. So my expertise was in adult development, how to be a more integrated, more fully human being, as we have in the bottom of the frame here in our podcast. So all of those together are what qualified me to do this. And I've read across disciplines. In order to write the book, I had to go back beyond my superficial knowledge of history that I had got from my schooling in elementary school, middle school, high school, and undergraduate work. And I had to read the history of the subjugations of women, of indigenous peoples, of Africans and African Americans. I had to read through all of that. I had to read the subsequent subjugations about the Vietnam War, the post 9/11 wars. I had to take a deeper dive into the current state beyond the initial subjugations of, well, is everything really okay now with women and indigenous peoples and African Americans? Are there new people being subjugated? So I've kept up to date with that. So all of that qualifies me. I would say, if you're not sure, if you want to know my qualifications, I can't say, well, I have this one degree out of this university, because that doesn't qualify me for anything. It just says I have a degree. You could read the book. You could read what people have said about the book. You could go to my Substack, where the most recent 4 episodes are always free. You have to pay if you want to get the archives. But all of that qualifies me to do this. And I'd be happy to, if you ask me a more specific question, I'd be happy to answer it in more depth. But it's not one thing that qualifies me.
No, I mean, I think you answered it pretty well. I just think it's important so folks understand who you are, who's going to be teaching the course, and why they should be interested in listening to you in that context, especially in today's world, where you have so many people who just put up a YouTube channel and give their opinions without having any background at all. Just that, again, we talked about someone like Stephen A. Smith, who's been a sports analyst his whole life. Then all of a sudden he wants to now give his opinions about politics. And it's just because he has a platform. So that's why I asked the question so folks can understand that you're not just some YouTuber that wants to just give his opinion. And so now with that being said, now you threw spirituality in there quickly about some of the things you cover in reference to the Jungian Carl Jung shadow element, geopolitics, human development, those things. How does that fit for a person who now, when they look at and they identify by their religion? So someone who's strictly, or if you ask them, who are you? They tell you, I'm a Christian. And they lead with it proudly, or I'm Jewish and lead with it proudly, or Muslim and lead with it proudly. So whatever that may be, or I'm atheist and lead with that proudly. So my question becomes now, how does a person's religious cultural givings, as you firmly call it, how does that play a role into being able to come in your class and receive this information? in that context?
Yeah, so it'll depend on several factors, and this brings us back to development. There are different ways to hold any religion. So I was going to say, I don't care if they're, but whether someone is Catholic, one of the Protestant denominations, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, there are different ways to hold the religion. I'm going to start with the higher levels of development. And I'm going to rephrase that, the later stages of development. And then with the people who have developed continually throughout their lives have later stages of development where they're more apt to look at all things as opposed to just my group. So I'll just stay with Catholicism for a moment, since that's what I was raised with. All right, so I was born into I'm a second generation New York Italian American Catholic by birth. I was forced to study Catholicism. I don't mean that in a mean way, but I went to both public and Catholic schools. And I'm answering your question, but I want to provide the context first. I've read and studied a lot of Buddhism in the last 30 years. A little bit of other religions, but mostly Buddhism. But for Catholics, there are some Catholics I know, this is what I was raised with, who still believe that they have the one true religion, that their God is the one true God, and that people who don't believe as they believe are wrong and misguided. Okay, that's an early level of development. That's an us against them level of development. Somebody with that view would have a great opportunity to learn more in this class, but might struggle with some of the concepts because the concepts are grounded in all of us in this together. So I mean, I could say more about what that means, but
I think you might. Yeah, I think you might want to explain more what that means.
So for over 50 years now, people have been studying adult developmental worldviews. And you and I have been using a shorthand version because it takes too long to teach a developmental model. That's not what I'm trying to do. But there's a great shorthand for adult development, and you and I have been using it. I'll just say this briefly here. An early and necessary stage of development, not adult development, but of development, is me-centric. It's all about me. That's necessary and appropriate when you're a toddler. Towards the end of infancy into toddlerhood, when you realize that you're separate emotionally and physically from your mother figure and your father figure, but mother figure is more important for many reasons because the mother figure carried you. You have a physical connection there. And that's an important stage of development to go through. If you're still me-centric when you're in your 30s, 50s, 70s, or 90s, that's problematic. When you develop in healthy development, the next stage is us-centric or group-centric. And that basically means I no longer am only identified with myself, but I identify with my group or my groups. That the first group is typically, if we're fortunate, family of origin. Then we might learn about nation, my citizenship or my religion. That's another group. And then my neighborhood, my friends, my school. And then when you become an adult, you might identify with your team at work if you are employed and you have a team, or maybe with your whole company or with your industry. So they're all groups. I mean, even includes your sports teams. If you are a fanatic about some sports team, that's an us-centric view. And that can be healthy or unhealthy. Nothing wrong with having a group that you believe in. And you're aware that, I grew up, I'm from New York, so I grew up as a Yankee fan, a Knicks fan. And I'm aware of the Boston Red Sox. I'm aware of the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks who are playing the Knicks. And that's fine if I have an us and them perspective. This is my group, that's their group, we compete, and then we have a beer, and we're all happy. But when it becomes us against them, it's unhealthy. In this stage of development, the unhealthy us-centrism, which, us versus them is another way to say it. And this is a really important statement I'm going to make. And once you hear it, I believe that any reasonable person would agree with it. The unhealthy us versus them perspective is responsible for every human atrocity at scale throughout human history, not just American history, throughout human history. Our group against their group, whether it was Genghis Khan, whether it was the Crusades, whether it was any one of the world wars, whether it was the Vietnam War, whether it was the American Revolution, whether it was the Civil War, whether it was the more recent bombings of Iran and the more recent killings in the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean by the American military. Those are all us versus them examples. Graduate from us centrism, you move into all of us centrism, or we could say human centrism, because our species is human. And you no longer, you can still belong to groups and enjoy your groups, but you no longer think of it as us against them. You're saying, okay, all of us are in this together on this planet. And the evidence is pretty clear that we are. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, which we touch on in the class, but we're all in this together. So it's no longer if just something happens, good or bad, to somebody in my group, one of my groups, but it's problematic because I feel the suffering of every human being, or I can celebrate the joy of every human being. Now, do I travel around the world celebrating and suffering? No, I don't do that, but I'm attuned in that way. I know what suffering feels like. I know what joy feels like. And I can read about or see that other people are suffering or experiencing joy as well. It's a whole different way of orienting in the world. And then the last one is all of us centrism. All that is centrism. So I move from just a human-centric view, and I really care about the planet and all the beings on it. So I care about animals, I care about trees, I care about the oceans and the rivers and the air and the universe, basically. Very, 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 very few people live in that last developmental worldview. Many people understand it and can speak about it and even, aspire to it, but very, very few people live there day to day. So that's the developmental shorthand. Me, it's all about me, it's all about us, our group, it's all about all humans, or it's all about everything, creation, the universe. And again, it's shorthand. Any one of the legitimate developmental models that's the result of longitudinal studies will have in the vicinity of 6 or 7 up to 12 levels that are more granular and more specific than me, us, all it is. But every developmental psychologist that I've spoken to or who has read my book agree that me, us, all that is an accurate shorthand to use. So I'll stop there.
Well, I think you said quite a bit. Things in there you said I kind of want to ask some other questions about, but I had a question that I don't want to lose sight of before I go there. That is, you spoke of how people use the term identity. And to me, identity is something I really learned the importance of how you identify yourself, what I went through, my storm in Baltimore, and how my identity was what drove me, gave me my purpose, and then drove me. And then, of course, realizing that my identity is not as locked in as I thought it was. Like I thought my identity was a fact as opposed to just a narrative, a story that I tell myself or I've been told by others about myself. And so with that being said, I think that a person's identity, when they come into a course similar to yours, particularly in today's time where the media and the narrative that constantly gets pushed now is constant division as much as possible and telling you that you need to stay in your group. You need to stay in that us versus them type of logic. That seems to be the most dominant conversation. Like, for example, my own brother and friends I grew up with, that's like a brother since I've known him my entire life. we can be from the same neighborhood and even the same community, even the same family. But when it gets to the point of talking about us versus them sports wise, it's something simple as that, we realize we can't even talk because they are so biased and so unmoving on their us as it relates to their sports team. The conversation becomes an exercise of futility. And that's just because they identify by that. They identity is strong tied to their sports team. And we're seeing that now in the country with MAGA. Their identity being so tied to their country. And I think that when you do that, you're easily manipulative or able to be manipulated as well. Because now you can just get triggered by someone saying we're attacking this particular group. So now my question now, with that context of identity coming into play, because you talked about the folks who are, there's not so many of the people who see the world and see themselves as one with the world, and they have a broader caring and love and interest in the entire world instead of just their group. That to me would be ideally the perfect market to bring to your things, people at that space, because then they can see the validity and the emotional intelligence and everyone else's other groups. So my question now, how do you control the conversation that you're going to be teaching from folks who may come in with their identities tied to their race, their country, their trauma, their religion, their ethnicity, any of those, their religion, I'm sorry, and their politics as well? How do you get them all to buy in? Because right now everybody's so divided that you can't even get people in the same room and talk politics if you're going to talk politics. Just curious.
Yeah. No, I love that question. And so there are a variety of ways. First of all, the course information that's available online is pretty detailed, and the course information will help people self-select. I even go through a whole series of questions. Is this for you? And I basically say, this might be for you if, and I have a list of, like 10 or 11 items there. But more to the point, let's assume for a moment that somebody decides to take the class and they have some of the characteristics you're describing, where they have a narrow view and they have a narrow sense of identity. I mean, 5 hours of the class, so it's a 10-session class, 2 hours per session. The last half hour of each session is the part, a couple of minutes ago, you notice I used the word spirituality, where we explore ourselves, basically. First, 90 minutes of each session deals with the specific stated content of the session. But the last half hour explores a series of questions, and which you and I have spoken about in the past 3 years. Arguably, the most important one is, who am I really? And we talk about that, and there's some teaching there. There's interaction, but there's some teaching there in terms of what do you really identify, as you just said. So the goal is, and you can't just say to somebody, this is the right way to be, because I don't do that. But I provide a container in which people get exposed to ideas, concepts, and viewpoints that they may not have been exposed to before. That's what education should do. And mainly through question and answer. And so identity, one way into identity is, well, okay, you have your race, you have your skin color, you have your religion, you have your sports team, you have all that stuff. I'm not going to try to list it all. Are you familiar with the part of you that hasn't changed since you were born, and maybe hasn't changed since before you were born? Because that gets into the spiritual nuance of the thing that we all share, this spark of consciousness or awareness, which the mystical parts of every religion deal with. If you drew concentric circles and how all these different religions, and the core in the middle was the mystic part, that's where they all agree. In quotation marks. They have different cultural things they bring to it. So what we do is we say, okay, we're talking about the history of the United States. We're talking about politics, current events, all these things that people are uncomfortable talking about. Who's doing the talking? That's part of the course. It doesn't say if you're not at a later session of level of development, you're wrong or not as good. It just says these are the viewpoints that are available to any human being. And so people get exposed to that. Now, if they were interested in education, that's a good thing. If they were interested in coming into a classroom setting to argue with people, exposure to new ideas will allow them to argue, but that's not what we're planning on doing. So I make it really clear as an educator. It took me some years to learn this because I began in the 1970s in high school classrooms, which is a great place to learn how to teach because high school students say what they think. But there's some democracy in the classroom, but we're not going to go off on tangents that aren't part of the curriculum that people paid money to attend to learn. In other words, this is what we're doing. Each session is clearly delineated. And if somebody wants to try to take that off track, I mean, they can ask a question. But I have no problem saying that's important. It's an important question. It's even an important discipline to look at. And it's not part of what we're doing if you look back at the course description and the sessions. So, I went off on various levels there, but the spiritual part of this is identity. Who am I really is a spiritual question, ultimately. I mean, you can work through, religion and patriotism and race and ethnicity, but if you continue to ask that question, who am I really is a spiritual question. And we delve into that. Last thing I'll say is one of the best examples or answers, not to that question, but summary statements of what we all share is Jason Reynolds, who's a young children's and young adult book author, wonderful author. And he was asked, and he's African American, and he was asked on an interview with Krista Tippett, how do you define anti-racism? Because after he had actually co-published a book for kids that he co-wrote with Ibram Kendi. And his answer, which I'm going to just paraphrase now, I have some of it from memory. It was a beautiful answer. But he said, anti-racism is simply the muscle that says, I love you because you remind me more of myself than not. Okay, that's a spiritual answer. You remind me more of myself than not. I love you because you remind me more of myself than not. He said a couple of sentences before that, but I forget what they were. That's a later level of development. I see you as not being very different from me, except maybe through appearances. That's a spiritually evolved answer. And the underlying premise there's two underlying premises of the course, which I'm going to just pause there for a second because you asked me a question and I kind of went on. I can come back to the underlying premises. Let me just put a pin in that and you can yell at me or respond or ask another question.
Well, yeah, like you said, you've been teaching for 50 years, so you've been teaching classes of diverse people. I'm looking at it from my perspective of working with diverse people in various business and or community type endeavors. And I've learned that if folks bring those identities to those collective group activities, it doesn't work, or you can't have those conversations, so you try to skate around race conversation or ethnicity conversation or country conversation or politics. As they say, two things you can't talk is religion and politics, because most people can't have those conversations. And their identity is so tied to that if the conversation even gets questioned, you question their very identity in their mind. And so now they may respond with a lot of energy. And so all that being said, I just really wanted to stay there for a minute because I really think people need to understand this. Because like I said, right now in today's world, if you just say these type of topics you're going to talk about, and people don't have the context of your background, your book, and they're just looking at it from a context of, here's what he's going to talk about: healing America's narratives. He's going to talk about the past, young shadow, and current events, and spirituality. Well, that's really a large data set to really kind of get our minds wrapped around.
Mhm.
And there's so many feelings about all that right now, and not knowing that, how do I not come in with my bias? That's my point. That's why I wanted to drill down a little bit more so people can really understand who you are and how you think. And then the other part of that would be, now you mentioned a little bit of it, but I definitely want you to talk about that as well. The structure of how the class is handled. In other words, is it lecture only and then questions, or is it ever interaction with the class, discussions, group dynamics? So just kind of talk about that as well, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. So with regard to people coming in with their biases, I mean, part of that is education. Educators, when you walk into an elementary school classroom, a high school classroom, a college classroom, the students come in with their biases. That's part of the deal. If you can, this is different because it's not, it's not an institution anymore, but that's always there. I mean, that's as an educator, that's just always part of the deal. You have no control over how people are when they come in. So that's just part of teaching. So that's one. And again, I believe that the course description, which is pretty detailed, will help people self-select. That's not for me, or it is for me, because it's really clear on what we're going to be doing, in terms of the description. So, the second part of what you asked is in terms of the structure of the class. I mean, let me just clarify what you mean by that. Do you want me to give you I could give you like 15 or 20 seconds on each of the 10 sections to say what we'd be actually working on, which might shed some light on it.
No, I meant from how do you manage the class? Is it lecture only?
Oh yeah, okay. I'm sorry, I forgot you. Yeah, so it's interactive. There's a lecture portion to it for sure. I mean, because there's content. It's not a class that's designed to say, okay, let's just talk about stuff. That's just not what I do. There's a body of knowledge, interdisciplinary body of knowledge that is being shared, but it is interactive, and there's definitely a Q. It's not so much I teach and then there's Q&A. It's interactive, so people can ask questions when they have questions. But again, I won't allow one person's need to either share what they know or to get stuck on one thing over the course of a class session if it leaves everybody else to sit there listening to this person. And that was true, and that's true in any classroom where teachers deal with students, and you honor the student, you honor in this case the participant or student, but it's the sense of, and I actually do this in the first session. We talk about skillful means in a classroom, the awareness that there are X number of other people here, and you can't dominate the class. But that's the old school, we call that classroom management. How good, teacher might be brilliant in their subject matter, but can't manage the classroom and the interactions within it, and then loses control of the space. Go ahead.
I wanted you to point that out because I think that's important. Definitely important for someone like myself. Yeah. I've been on a meeting recently where it was set up in a Zoom session format, because when you open yourself up to virtual meetings, that means anybody who just has an internet connection can dial in, especially if there's no fee. And what that does is they're going to bring people in that's going to bring energy that's not there. And if you don't have the rules clearly established of how you're going to run your session, then people, and you don't let folks know, I'm muting you right now until it's time to speak. Raise your hand and I unmute you, and then you can talk. If you don't really establish that, then let everyone just have an open dialogue. One person came on and talked for like 35 minutes, and it changed the whole energy of it. And so that's what I'm saying. So my point is, so for me, not having that clarity is, this is how, here's the quorum of the meeting. Here's the rules of how we're going to run and really get that established. And I really wanted you to talk that through so folks who are watching can understand how you run it. Like I said, the topics definitely lead to, if that clarity is not there, and they never worked with you before, they can easily see how that can go astray. Now the whole 30, 40-minute sessions have been chunked up by one person telling you that you sound left-leaning or you sound too woke, and he wants to stay there instead of just growing with you and letting the class develop as you're teaching.
Well, I love the way you ended that I sound too left-leaning or too woke. And I'm laughing because I forget which session it is, if it's session 5 or 6. I'm just going to go look right now. Actually, it's session 7 of the class, where we actually is spent on the language in America right now. And we take a pretty deep dive into, I'm just going to say some of them out loud, what the word elite means in various connotations. It doesn't mean just one thing. But when people use that word, what do they really mean? What does the word woke mean? We look at the history of that word. And you and I have spoken about that. In fact, it's in my book as well. And I've gotten increasingly clear by writing the book and teaching. I can do that better than I could 3 or 4 years ago, because I've had to do it in front of people for a number of years now. We take a close look at what diversity, equity, and inclusion means as one unit, and we look at what each word means. We look at what critical race theory is, and the most popular or infamous concept in critical race theory, which people have heard of superficially, usually, intersectionality. We look at where that came from, the actual court case summarized by Kimberly Crenshaw. That's in this class. So, and this is the problem that we have in this country now because of the way people get information. There are people who will talk about elites, being woke, intersectionality, critical race theory, et cetera, all things I just said. And if you say, well, when you say woke, what do you really mean by that? Well, when you say intersectionality, what does that really mean to you? They have no idea. They were just told by the talking heads that they believe that thing is either good or bad, usually bad in the examples I was using. And they can't tell you what they're criticizing. Anybody that takes the course will move beyond that because they'll know what that stuff means. Then they can decide to like it or not. But and all this stuff is available. I mean, read Kimberly Crenshaw's paper in the University of Chicago Law Review. I think that's the title of the review, in 1989. It's online. You can go to the website. You can download it if you want. And you can read it. I did, because I wanted to know what I was talking about. So that's just one example. So if somebody is right-leaning, they might hear me as left-leaning. If somebody is extremely left-leaning, they might hear me as not woke enough. My goal is to do this work in what I call a transpartisan way that transcends partisanship. In other words, I don't want to put a label on it. I'm going to just tell you my view on this issue. Because if you call somebody a liberal or call them a conservative or call them woke or you call them fascist or you call them whatever, okay, what are you really saying? So ask me my thoughts on this issue and I can articulate my thoughts, but don't try to put me into a category. And in this class, we won't be putting people into categories. Now, will we ever use that language? Yeah. Joe Biden was a Democratic president. Donald Trump is a Republican president. So there's, those are just true statements in terms of party alignments. but we don't use sweeping generalizations as a substitution for nuanced conversation. And that's, again, it's an education, both in terms of the content and how to be with the content. How to talk about it as well.
Right. So how long is the class as far as minutes?
Yeah. So it's 10 2-hour sessions.
Oh, so 2-hour sessions. Okay.
Yeah. And go ahead.
And since they're going to be done virtually, what's going to be the tool you're using? Like, will it be Zoom? They call in and
it'll be Zoom. And once you register for the class, you'll get the link, and it'll be the same link for all the classes. It's not a link you should share with anybody else. I'll have a roster. Anybody that's not registered for the class doesn't get in. So it's a real class. It's not a Zoom meeting where anybody can show up. It's a course that you have to register and pay for. And again, it's 2-hour sessions, probably a 5-minute break at the top of the hour to, bathroom break, so people can stand up, stretch, go do what they need to do. But it will be a 5-minute break. If you take 10 minutes, you will have missed what we did once we started, because if people are paying for a class, I'm not going to waste their time. You get your money's worth, and then they get it recorded. So it will be recorded, and everybody gets to download and keep the recording for the rest of their life and share it with their grandkids someday if they want. That's a joke. So 2 hours weekly. It'll be on Sunday afternoons, 1 to 3 Eastern time. I tried to find there's no great time. Like, there's always reasons not to put it on a certain day or a certain time in the evening or whatever. And so this first iteration will be Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern time. That's, and again, it will be on Zoom. And
are students, as far as the rules of the class, are they required to have their cameras on?
I do ask people. I don't make it a requirement. I ask people to be present with their cameras on. Yeah. I tell them why. Basically, so we have all of you are participating in the class, and not just sitting around playing with your cat or vacuuming your living room or your office space while the rest of us are actually engaging in some kind of an educational experience.
So you want people to be present. That's what you want to make sure of.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody wants to pay for the course and not participate in it, I don't want to say that's okay with me, because it's really not. It's not like, well, I got their tuition, so I don't care what they do, because I really do care. This is because I care about this country, and I care about education and adult development. It's not me, trying to get rich or famous or anything. It's me being an educator. And the class is limited to, I went back and forth between 30 and 40 people. It's going to be 40. I'd be pleasantly surprised if we got 40, but I didn't want any more than that in there. I mean, when I was first a high school teacher, we had, there's a Catholic school in New York, and it was, sometimes there were 42, 43 kids in the classroom. So I was young, and I thought that's just the way things were. But then later on in my career, I was in schools that, when I was doing poetry in the schools, and there's like 15 or 20 kids in the classroom. That's a much better educational environment. But, so it has it has a ceiling on it in terms of how many people can be in, will be present to it. And we'll see how it goes.
And what's the price? How are you dealing with the price?
Yeah, it's a sliding scale. So I looked around in terms of courses that are available, both institutionally sponsored courses and in what other people are doing with online education. And so it's priced on the low end for 20 hours of instruction, but it's a sliding scale from $750, which is what the class I think is worth. And the sliding scale goes down to $350 for 20 hours of instruction. And that's what it's worth. So I asked several people who said, it could be priced as much as, $2,000. And there are things out there that provide information over, 15 to 20 hours that are priced at that. Most of those are designed to help people make money, though. So they're willing to invest money to make more money. I'm asking people to invest less in order to become more educated. So yeah, I'm a little bit I'm not naive at all about that. But if I didn't need to make a living still, and I do need to make a living, I would do this for free. If I were financially independent, if I had made my millions of dollars over the last 50 years, which I didn't as a Catholic school teacher and then a poet in the schools, and then for a few years as a coach, which I still do some of that. But I just need to keep working. If I didn't need I didn't need income, I would offer this for free, but I would have some kind of a qualifier, because a lot of times people misbehave and aren't as committed to something that's free because they don't think it's really that valuable because it's often offered for free. Having to have some skin in the game by paying tuition tends to separate people who are looking to make trouble from people who want to learn. So,
you could always give them a refund at the end.
So if I charge the money and then refund at the end if I didn't need the money. Yeah.
Say you complete the course, then you stay the whole 10 weeks and you actually get engaged and you talk about write an essay of what you learned, and you can get your tuition back.
Yeah, someday I'd love to be able to do that.
Well, as we get near the top of the hour, I just want to give you one more opportunity to, share any other information about the class that you want to in the last closing minutes to let people know links they can sign up for, where they can get access to.
Yeah, so the best place to get all the information for the class is on the Healing America's Narratives website. And all that is Healing America's Narratives. No punctuation, just write all that in there. It's easy to find. .com, and click on the link that's on the menu item that says 2026 courses. And all the information is there. And the title of the course is For Our Grandchildren and Theirs. And there's more information than some people probably would want. But it's pretty concise. Like if you just want to get the description and the 10 session outline, it's right there. There's a tuition, how much it's worth. There's a link to register. And you can just do that, or you can click on a bunch of other links and learn more. There's a link to the working bibliography where you can see all the books that inform my view. It's pretty lengthy. There's a link to voices, essential voices, quotes from historical figures that go way back to American history, and even other than American history, right up to some current figures. So all that's available. It gives people a good sense of what they might be getting themselves into. And there's a link that if they want to have a conversation with me, they can click on the link, fill out a quick questionnaire, and we'll set up a time to talk before the course. If somebody wants to talk to me, I'm happy to do that. But they have to answer some questions first, because I don't want to just put my email out there, which is available if you look hard enough. But they have to answer a couple of questions first, so I know who they are.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much everything you want to cover. Any other?
Yeah, I don't want to rush through I could say a couple of things about each session, but I'd be rushing through that now, so I'm not going to do that.
All right.
It's up there online. It's really easy to find.
All right, great. Well, it sounds like a great course. One of the things as we close out, I wanted to share this thought with you. Well, no, I'll do that in my last session. So now as we get ready to shift into our last session, being who do we want to lift up as an example of someone who is fully human, either past or the present, give them that flower, so to speak. I'll let you go first. I'm sure you have somebody already loaded up. I don't want to take that from you.
Oh, sure. Put me in the hot seat first. Yeah, so I'm actually finished. Somebody I actually have mentioned this person before, and I'm actually the other class that I'm teaching this semester is called The Problem When He's Stoned, the songs and life of Chris Christopherson, who was an inspirational figure to me when I was a kid. I learned who he was when I was 16 years old, when he was first appearing as a singer-songwriter. he was a Rhodes Scholar. He was in the United States Army. He was a Ranger, helicopter pilot, volunteered in Vietnam. They wouldn't send him. He gave it all up, went to Nashville, became a custodian for 5 years, trying to get his songs listened to. And finally, people did listen to his music. Blah, 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 blah. So he just had this big life, following his dream, doing the thing that he felt called to do, not what his parents expected of him, which he did to about the age of 29. So he lived, from my perspective, a really fully human life. He died in September of 2024 at the age of 88. So Chris Christopherson, again, was an inspiration to me to learn more and more about the world, because he did that himself.
Okay. Yeah, I know you shared a couple of times how much of an influence he was in your life, and taught me a lot about him. I didn't, like I said, before I met you, all he was the actor on that one of those trucking movies. I can't remember.
I think it was Convoy.
Convoy. Yeah, that's all he was to me. And I think I maybe saw him in another movie here or there. I couldn't remember the name, but you gave me much more of a fuller appreciation of his humanity. And so now when I look at him, it's a whole different level of reverence and respect. So I appreciate that. And obviously, the person I'm going to choose today is somebody who I was first exposed to by Dr. Wayne Dyer. And one of these days, he's going to be the person I choose. But it was Henry David Thoreau, and he's always talking about Thoreau in his speeches. That was my first exposure to Thoreau, and it interested me enough because I was so interested in Dr. Wayne Dyer and thought that what he said and what he shared was on point and very interesting. I looked up Thoreau and just really got a chance to learn about him as a person. And, back then, anybody in that time frame to me who was an abolitionist and fought for the rights of others is someone who I definitely respect, but they didn't have to, but they could have easily just been comfortable in their own privilege and lives and just said, okay, well, that's too bad, but left it at that. But they actually took a stand and put their lives at risk and put their careers at risk and everything. And I definitely have a great deal of respect for those individuals. And him being one of them, those individuals. And to me, he's an example. You talked about there's not too many people in that fourth category of being in tune with the world and nature and everything. And I think that he fits in that category. Being a transcendentalist, I have difficulty saying that word for some reason. And seeing a divinity spark in everybody. Then at the same time, he was quoted as saying things such as he wanted to be available to see every rose, but when it pops, he wants to see every one of them. Like just the idea of having that kind of reverence of nature and saying that if you really want to learn, get an education, study the bumblebee, right? And his ability to plot out land and just how he saw land and nature was just, they said the environmental movement actually came from him. There's really a great PBS special on him right now. But more importantly, I look at it as what I learned is that he was a great influence in people's lives that I also admire. Like Malcolm X read his book when he was in prison. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. got access to his book. Gandhi read his book. So his influence, and to only live about 50 years, so getting all that in that period of time was definitely an incredible feat. So, those are the kind of people I always look to. That's why I have them, folks like that are behind my head, is because when I want that guidance, I want to learn from folks who walk the path at a much more, I believe, difficult time in the world, and they still chose humanity over anything else with the identity. So Henry David Thoreau is my choice today.
Yeah, love Thoreau. There's actually a quick comment on that. So there's a not a movement, but there historically, and again, they weren't recordings back then, but we know of him as Henry David Thoreau, with an accent on the last syllable. And there's evidence that he pronounced his name with an accent on the first syllable. So it sounds like thorough, like I was very thorough, which he was. So a lot of people now campaigning to impact the way we pronounce his last name. So it says Thorough as opposed to Thoreau. I think it's going to be unsuccessful because it's so much ingrained in our way of thinking about him that it's Henry David Thoreau. But they say that he really wanted it. He pronounced it thorough. So.
Well, I'm glad you shared it because I like it. I think that he was very thorough. You know, so I agree with him. That should be his name. If you're gonna think about thorough as a image, he would come to mind.
Yeah, you ought to get up to Walden Pond and walk around the pond and see they actually have preserved his little cabin there, and there's a statue to him. I just saw that once, probably almost 10 years ago now. I was up in Massachusetts, but it was worth going to see it. I was actually really, just to see how he lived. I mean, this little cabin near the pond. It's just pretty astounding. A simpler time came. Man.
Well, yeah. So excellent. And we'll do that. But we're gonna bring our show to an end. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you all for listening, audience. For watching this episode of Healing America's Narratives. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope everyone continues to look for ways to be more fully human. Thank you all.